Jackson had never been one to believe in love at first sight, but the moment he stepped onto the planet Vothran, his world was turned upside down. The bustling alien city was a sight to behold, filled with towering skyscrapers that stretched beyond. The clouds, all made from materials Jackson had never seen before. The air was thick with the scent of exotic spices and fresh rainfall, and the noise of various species speaking in languages he could hardly understand buzzed in his ears. Yet despite the alien environment, it was her, Princess Zalara, who captured his full attention. It was hard not to notice her. The princess was unlike anyone Jackson had ever encountered. With dark, shimmering skin that seemed to reflect the starlight, eyes like glowing amber, and long black hair that fell like a waterfall down her back, she held an aura of royalty and mystery. But it wasn't just her physical beauty that drew him in. It was the way she carried herself, poised yet distant, as though she was always several steps ahead of those around her. She had a kind of power, a strength that no one else in the room could match. Jackson's job as an Earth ambassador wasn't an easy one. He had been assigned to Vothran to help foster diplomatic relations between his people and the alien races that called the planet home. The task was monumental. Vothran was a place of ancient and powerful civilizations, each with its own customs and traditions, and they were skeptical of Earth's intentions. But Jackson was determined. He had spent years preparing for this mission, learning about Vothran's people, their history, and their technology. But none of that had prepared him for her. Princess Zalara was not just another alien leader. She was the heir to the throne, and her role in Vothran's future was of immense importance. Her wisdom and diplomatic skills were renowned, and she had a reputation for being both compassionate and fiercely intelligent. She was also one of the few beings on the planet who could bridge the gap between the different factions, keeping peace among them with an unmatched grace. Their first meeting was arranged in a grand hall as part of the welcoming ceremony for Jackson's arrival. Jackson had studied her carefully from a distance, admired her even. He knew the importance of making a good impression, so he prepared himself for the meeting, practicing his speech and adjusting his Earth attire, which looked strange among the richly adorned alien dignitaries. Yet when he entered the room and saw her standing at the front, greeting guests with that calm, regal demeanor, all his careful preparations seemed useless. Her presence commanded attention the moment she entered the room. Jackson found himself entranced by the way she moved, her every step fluid and confident, as though she were walking through a space meant solely for her. She exchanged polite words with everyone around her, but her gaze always seemed to linger, just a little longer on Jackson. There was something in the way she looked at him, a curiosity, perhaps, or an interest that he couldn't quite place. As the ceremony continued, Jackson couldn't focus on anything except Zalara. Her laughter, soft, yet musical, floated over the crowd, and he found himself captivated by the sound. When their eyes met for the first time across the crowded hall, he felt a flutter in his chest, a feeling he had never experienced before. He quickly shook it off, telling himself that he was just imagining things. He was here to do a job, not fall in love with a princess. But as the days passed, Jackson found himself thinking about her more and more. He attended meetings, social events, and diplomatic discussions, but his mind always seemed to wander back to her. Whenever she was nearby, he could feel his heart race a little faster, his hands grow clammy. He couldn't explain it. It was as if there was some invisible thread pulling him toward her, and no matter how hard he tried to resist, he couldn't ignore it. Zalara, for her part, seemed to take little notice of Jackson's internal struggle. She remained focused on her duties as the princess, carrying out her responsibilities with the kind of precision and care that earned her respect from all who knew her. She was always surrounded by advisors and other political figures. Her time, carefully allocated to matters of state and diplomacy. She never seemed to have a moment to herself. And yet, Jackson caught glimpses of her when the crowds thinned. when the weight of the day seemed to wear on her, and he saw a side of her that others didn't. She wasn't just a princess. She was a person who had the same doubts, fears, and desires as anyone else. Jackson noticed the small, fleeting expressions that passed over her face when she thought no one was looking. The exhaustion in her eyes after long meetings, the brief smile she shared when she spoke about her childhood, the quiet moments when she seemed lost in thought. It was in those moments that he saw a depth to her that no one else seemed to notice. It wasn't long before Jackson found himself seeking out these small moments. He would linger in hallways after meetings, hoping for a glimpse of her. He would sit in the palace gardens, pretending to admire the alien flora, but really waiting for her to pass by so he could speak to her for a few moments. And when they did speak, the conversations always felt natural, as if they had known each other, far longer than they really had. They talked about everything, Earth, Vothran, the galaxy, but there was always an underlying tension, an unspoken understanding that neither of them dared to voice. Jackson could feel it growing inside him, an undeniable connection that only grew, stronger with every passing day. He was falling in love with her, and yet he knew that it was impossible. She was a princess, bound by the traditions of her people, expected to marry a powerful prince from a neighboring planet. That was the way of things. She couldn't be with someone like him. He was an outsider, a human in a world of beings far, more advanced and powerful than he could ever hope to be. And yet, every time he saw her, every time they spoke, that connection between them deepened. He couldn't deny it any longer. He was in love with her. But what good was love if it could never be? One evening, after another long day of diplomatic meetings, Jackson found himself in the palace's grand courtyard, looking up at the twin moons that hung high in the sky. The soft breeze carried the scent of jasmine from the garden, and the world seemed peaceful, almost serene. He had come to this spot many times before to gather his thoughts, but tonight there was a feeling in the air that was different. Suddenly, he heard footsteps behind him. He didn't need to turn around to know who it was. It was Zalara. "Jackson," she said softly, her voice like a melody in the stillness of the night. He turned to face her, his heart pounding in his chest. "Princess?" he said, his voice unsteady despite his best efforts to keep it calm. She smiled at him, that same smile that had melted his heart countless times before. "I see you found a quiet place to think. I wanted to thank you for your patience over the past few weeks. Your work here has not gone unnoticed." Jackson nodded, his words caught in his throat. He could barely concentrate on her words, his mind racing with thoughts of what he had been hiding from her all this time. "I'm glad I've been of help," he said quietly. "But there's something I've been meaning to say." Zalara's gaze softened, and for the first time there was no formality in her eyes, just a quiet understanding, as if she knew exactly what he was going to say. "I have loved you for years," Jackson blurted out before he could stop himself. There was a long silence between them, and for a moment, Jackson thought he had made a terrible mistake. Maybe he had misread the signs. Maybe he had completely misunderstood her. But then Zalara's eyes softened, and she took a step closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've known," she said. The grand banquet hall buzzed with excitement. The air was filled with the scent of rich foods from across the galaxy, mingling with the soft glow of alien lanterns hanging from the vaulted ceilings. Vothran's elite had gathered for a night of celebration, welcoming Jackson as Earth's representative in their midst. The event was meant to honor the success of the diplomatic talks, but for Jackson, it felt like anything but a celebration. Tonight, something was weighing heavily on his mind, something he could no longer ignore. Jackson moved through the crowd with a forced smile on his face. He exchanged pleasantries with dignitaries from various races, all of them much older and more experienced in the art of diplomacy than he. Their conversations were polite but impersonal, filled with carefully rehearsed compliments and observations about the ongoing negotiations. Yet, despite the seemingly successful nature of the evening, his attention kept drifting toward one person, Princess Xylera. She was the center of attention as usual, holding court with dignitaries, exchanging words with leaders from other worlds. The way she carried herself, her poised grace and her sharp wit, always captivated him. There was no denying that her beauty was otherworldly, but it was her strength and intelligence that truly held him in awe. Her conversations were never shallow. They were always filled with purpose and insight, showing a deep understanding of the galaxy's complexities. Jackson watched her from a distance, his heart fluttering in his chest. It had been months since that quiet conversation in the garden, when he had confessed his love for her. He had expected her to brush him off, to reject him as a mere Earth ambassador who could never be her equal. But instead, she had only smiled, softly, and admitted that she had known about his feelings. The moment had left him shaken. And though she hadn't said anything more, it had been enough to send Jackson's heart racing every time he saw her. Tonight, however, something was different. The weight of his feelings had only grown with time, and the uncertainty about what came next gnawed at him. He couldn't go on pretending that he didn't care, not when he had already poured out his heart to her. The tension in the air was thick, and it seemed to mirror the storm inside him. He had to know. He had to understand whether there was something more between them or if his feelings had been nothing more than a fleeting hope. Taking a deep breath, Jackson made his way across the room, his steps hesitant but determined. As he walked, the crowd parted effortlessly, sensing his approach but paying him no mind. It was as though they had grown accustomed to his presence. He found himself standing in front of her, and for a moment, it felt as though the entire universe had paused, leaving only the two of them in this space. Xylera stood at the center of a small group, but when she saw Jackson, her eyes locked onto his. There was a moment of stillness, a silent understanding that passed between them. The rest of the crowd seemed to blur out of existence, and Jackson found himself caught in the intensity of her gaze. His heart thudded painfully in his chest. "Jackson," she said, her voice soft but clear, cutting through the noise of the banquet. "I was hoping to speak with you." There was no turning back now. Jackson knew it was now or never. He couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine when inside, all he could think about was her. "I need to tell you something," Jackson said, his voice steady but his hands trembling slightly. He tried to keep his composure, but the words felt heavy in his mouth. Xylera gave him a small, encouraging smile. "Of course. What's on your mind?" Taking a deep breath, Jackson finally let the words spill out. "I've loved you for years, Xylera. I've tried to deny it. I've tried to focus on my duties, but every day it's been you. I can't keep pretending that I don't feel this way." Xylera's face softened. There was no shock, no surprise in her expression. Instead, there was a quiet understanding, as though she had been waiting for him to say these words all along. The room around them seemed to fade even further into the background, leaving just the two of them standing there in the center of the grand hall. Xylera studied Jackson for a moment, her eyes reflecting a range of emotions, curiosity, tenderness, and something else he couldn't quite place. "You've loved me for years?" she repeated, her voice gentle. She stepped closer to him, the soft rustle of her gown the only sound. "Jackson, I've known." Her words hit him like a sudden shockwave. He hadn't expected that. He had thought, foolishly, that his feelings were his alone, that perhaps she had never noticed. But here she was, admitting that she had known. The realization sent his thoughts spinning. I didn't think," Jackson stammered, feeling as though the ground had shifted beneath him. Xylera reached out, her fingers brushing his arm, sending a jolt of warmth through him. "You didn't think I knew?" I've seen the way you look at me, the way you speak to me. I knew from the first time we met that you were different from the others. I knew you were someone who didn't just see me as a princess, but as a person." Jackson's chest tightened at her words. His heart swelled, a mix of relief and awe filling him. To think that she had seen through the walls he had built around himself was more than he could have ever hoped for. And yet, despite her words, there was still an air of distance between them. Something unsaid lingered in the space between them. "But why didn't you say anything?" Jackson asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why didn't you tell me?" Zalara lowered her gaze, her fingers curling slightly as she withdrew her hand from his arm. "I couldn't. Not yet." The weight of her words was like a stone sinking in Jackson's stomach. He couldn't understand. If she had known, if she had felt the same, why hadn't she said anything? Why hadn't she given him any sign that she might feel the same way? "There are things I cannot explain," Zalara continued, her voice low, filled with a complexity that Jackson couldn't fathom. "Things beyond our control. My responsibilities, my duty to Vothran, are not mine alone. There are forces, traditions, and laws that I must abide by. If I were to act on these feelings, it could bring chaos to Vothran. You and I are not just two people in love. Our bond could change everything." Jackson frowned, a mixture of confusion and frustration bubbling up inside him. "What do you mean? I don't understand." "I don't expect you to," she said, softly, her eyes never leaving his. "But I need you to trust me. This is not just about you and me. This is about something much larger than either of us. She stopped herself, her voice faltering for the first time. "I need to protect you, Jackson, and I need to protect Vothran." Jackson felt a wave of disappointment wash over him, but he nodded slowly. He understood the weight of her words, the responsibility that came with her position. He had always known that being with her would never be simple, but hearing her admit it made the truth sting all the more. "I understand," he said, though a part of him still longed for something more. Zalara placed a hand on his chest, her fingers barely brushing his skin, but the touch sent a warmth through him that made everything else fade away. "Do you?" "I do," he whispered, though the uncertainty still clung to his words. "But I don't know if I can live with this distance between us." The soft smile that played at the corners of Zalara's lips was bittersweet. "Neither do I." But as the night continued around them with the sounds of laughter and clinking glasses filling the air, Jackson knew that no matter the cost, his feelings for her would remain. What they would become, only time would tell. The days following the banquet felt like a blur. Despite his best efforts to keep his focus on his duties as Earth's ambassador, Jackson couldn't stop thinking about Zalara. The weight of their conversation hung over him, filling his thoughts at every moment. The palace, the meetings, the diplomatic dinners, they all faded into the background as the memory of her words repeated endlessly in his mind. He understood that their feelings for each other weren't simple. Zalara had made it clear that the bond between them was more complicated than just two people falling in love. But understanding it didn't make it any easier to accept. The distance between them felt like an invisible wall, and no matter how much he tried to convince himself that he could live with it, a part of him always rebelled. Jackson spent most of his time in the palace, attending meetings and performing the various tasks expected of him, but he always found his thoughts drifting back to the princess. Even as he stood among diplomats, discussing trade agreements and planetary security, his eyes would search for her in the crowd. The brief moments when he caught her gaze, those fleeting seconds when their eyes met, were the only times when he felt truly alive. But they were rare, and after each one, the distance between them seemed to grow just a little bit more. One afternoon, after another long meeting, Jackson decided to take a walk through the palace gardens. The gardens had become a place of solace for him, a place where he could escape the pressures of his role and think about the things that truly mattered. The flowers, strange and beautiful, bloomed with vibrant colors, their petals shimmering in the sunlight. The air was thick with the scent of alien herbs, and the gentle hum of distant conversations echoed in the background. As he wandered through the twisting paths, Jackson couldn't help but feel the weight of his decision. The conversation with Zalara had been a turning point, one that had brought clarity but also uncertainty. He had confessed his feelings, and she had responded with words that both comforted and confused him. She had known for years, yet had kept her distance. She had spoken of forces beyond their control, things that neither of them could change. Jackson understood that she was trapped by her position as princess, bound by duties that he could never fully comprehend. But still, there was a part of him that wanted more. He wanted to believe that they could somehow overcome the barriers that separated them. As he reached the center of the garden, he saw her, Zalara, standing alone near a fountain, her back to him. She looked as regal as ever, her long black hair cascading down her back, her movements graceful and fluid. She was lost in thought, her eyes focused on the water, her expression distant. For a moment, Jackson hesitated. He wanted to approach her, to speak with her again, but he wasn't sure what he would say. What could he say that wouldn't sound foolish, that wouldn't make things even more complicated? But then, as if sensing his presence, Zalara turned, her amber eyes meeting his. A soft smile curved her lips, and she stepped forward, her gait smooth and confident. "Jackson," she said, her voice as calm as ever. "I knew I would find you here." Jackson felt his heart race at the sound of her voice, but he quickly composed himself. "I thought I might need some time to think," he said, gesturing to the garden around them. "This place has a way of clearing my head." Zalara nodded, her gaze lingering on him for a moment before she spoke again. "I've been thinking too, about what you said, about us." Jackson's breath caught in his throat. He had no idea what to expect, but he hoped that this time they could have an honest conversation, one that would bring them closer, rather than pushing them further apart. "I know we can't just throw away our responsibilities," he said slowly, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "But I can't ignore how I feel. And I know you feel the same way. I don't want to live with this distance between us, not when we have the chance to." Zalara raised a hand, her fingers gently resting on his arm. "I know, Jackson. I know," she said softly. "But there is something I have to tell you, something that goes far beyond our feelings." Jackson looked at her in confusion, his brow furrowing. "What do you mean?" She took a deep breath, her expression growing serious. "There's a prophecy," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "A prophecy that has been passed down through my family for centuries. It speaks of a union between an outsider, a human, and a royal of Vothran. It is said that this union will either save the galaxy or destroy it. The consequences are unimaginable." Jackson's mind raced as he tried to process her words. "A prophecy? You're saying that we, our feelings, are part of some ancient prediction?" Zalara nodded. "Yes. It has been kept secret from the public for generations. My family has done everything in its power to prevent this prophecy from coming true. The risks are too great. If the wrong people learn about it, if they use it to their advantage, the galaxy could fall into chaos." Jackson felt a chill run down his spine. He had known that there was more to Zalara than he could understand, that her life was complicated in ways he could never fully grasp. But this? A prophecy that could alter the fate of the entire galaxy? It was more than he had ever imagined. "So, what does this mean for us?" Jackson asked, his voice thick with uncertainty. Are we supposed to stay away from each other?" Zalara's eyes softened, her hand still resting on his arm. "It's not that simple," she said quietly. "The prophecy is a burden I have carried my entire life. I have been raised to believe that this bond between us, this connection, is a threat. But I have also come to realize that it might not be as simple as we think. Maybe, just maybe, the prophecy was meant to happen. Maybe we were meant to be together." Jackson felt his heart leap in his chest, but at the same time, fear crept into his mind. He didn't know if he was ready for what that could mean. The galaxy, Vothran, everything was at stake. How could they possibly handle something so dangerous? "I don't know what the right choice is," Zalara continued, "but I know that I can't keep pretending that nothing is happening between us. I care for you, Jackson, more than I can put into words, but the future is uncertain, and we must be prepared for whatever comes next." Jackson reached out and took her hand in his, the connection between them feeling more real than ever. "I don't care what the prophecy says," he said, his voice low but resolute. "I care about you, and no matter what happens, I'm willing to face it with you. Together." Zalara looked at him for a long moment, as if weighing his words. Finally, she nodded, a small but genuine smile playing at the corners of her lips. "Then we will face it together, Jackson, whatever happens." And in that moment, despite the uncertainty that lay ahead, Jackson felt a sense of peace settle over him. The future was unclear, but one thing was certain. He was no longer alone. They would face whatever challenges the galaxy threw at them, side by side. The days following their conversation were filled with a mix of anticipation and unease. Jackson and Zalara had agreed to face whatever the future held together, but both of them knew that the prophecy was not something they could easily dismiss. It loomed over them like a shadow, growing ever larger the more they tried to ignore it. Jackson couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding. The galaxy had always been a place of danger, but now it felt as though he were standing on the edge of a precipice. There were things about Vothran and its ancient history that he didn't understand, things that Zalara had only hinted at. The prophecy was a constant presence in his mind, but Zalara seemed determined to keep it hidden, as though she feared the consequences of knowing too much. Despite the weight of their situation, Jackson found himself drawn closer to Zalara. Their conversations, though brief, became moments of quiet intimacy. They would often meet in the gardens or the quiet corners of the palace, where they could speak freely without the eyes of Vothran's court watching them. The connection between them deepened with each passing day, but so too did the tension. They were walking a thin line between love and duty, and neither of them knew where it would lead. One evening, as the twin moons of Vothran hung high in the sky, Zalara sent for Jackson. Her message was brief. "Meet me in the underground chambers. We need to talk." Jackson's heart raced as he made his way through the palace's grand hallways, his footsteps echoing in the silence. The palace was massive, its walls lined with ancient tapestries and intricate carvings that told the story of Vothran's history. The underground chambers, however, were a place few ever ventured. They were hidden beneath the palace, a maze of corridors and secret rooms that held relics of a bygone era, artifacts from a time long forgotten. When Jackson reached the entrance to the chambers, he was greeted by two royal guards, their expressions unreadable. They nodded at him in silent acknowledgement, and without a word, they stepped aside to allow him to pass. As he descended deeper into the palace, the air grew colder, and the walls seemed to close in around him. The stone corridors were lined with shelves of ancient scrolls, their contents written in a language Jackson couldn't read. The further he walked, the more the weight of the place pressed on him. It felt as though he were stepping back in time to an age where secrets were kept in the dark, and only the chosen few were allowed to know the truth. Finally, He arrived at a large chamber, its walls lined with shelves of ancient books and relics. In the center of the room stood Zalara, her silhouette bathed in the pale light of a single candle. She looked up as he entered, her eyes dark with concern. "Jackson," she said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of something unsaid. "I had to bring you here. There are things about the prophecy, things I've never told you, things that I'm afraid might change everything." Jackson stepped forward, his pulse quickening. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice low. Zalara hesitated, her fingers tracing the edge of an ancient scroll. "There are dark forces at work in the galaxy, Jackson. Forces that have been watching me, for years. They know about the prophecy, and they want to use it to their advantage." Jackson's stomach tightened. "Who are they?" "They are the Ancient Ones," Zalara replied, her voice almost a whisper. "A group of powerful beings who have existed for millennia. They were once the rulers of Vothran, but they were overthrown long ago. They now exist in the shadows, manipulating events from behind the scenes. They believe that the prophecy will give them the power to reclaim control over Vothran and the galaxy." Jackson frowned. "So they want to use you and me to take over the galaxy?" Zalara nodded grimly. "Exactly. They believe that if they can force the union between us to happen, they will gain control of the galaxy's power. They've been waiting for this moment for centuries. And now that the prophecy is beginning to unfold, they will stop at nothing to ensure that it comes to pass." Jackson's mind raced. The idea of these Ancient Ones lurking in the shadows and pulling the strings of the galaxy was both terrifying and surreal. He had known that their love was not simple, but he hadn't realized just how much was at stake. His feelings for Zalara now felt like a fragile thread, one that could be severed at any moment by forces beyond their control. "What can we do?" Jackson asked, his voice filled with determination. "How do we stop them?" Zalara met his gaze, her expression a mixture of fear and resolve. "We need to find the source of their power, Jackson. The prophecy speaks of a hidden artifact, a relic, that holds the key to defeating the Ancient Ones. It is said to be hidden deep within the palace, in a place where no one has ever dared to go. Only those with the blood of the royal family can access it." Jackson felt a chill run through him. "And you think the artifact can stop them?" "I know it can," Zalara said, her voice steady. "But finding it will not be easy. The Ancient Ones have hidden it well, and they will stop at nothing to prevent us from getting to it." A cold silence hung between them as the weight of their situation sank in. Jackson knew that they were on the brink of something far bigger than themselves. Their love, their bond, had become the center of a galaxy-spanning conflict, one that could change the course of history. "We'll do whatever it takes," Jackson said, his voice firm. "Together." Zalara smiled faintly, a look of gratitude in her eyes. "Together," she agreed. As the two of them stood in the darkened chamber, the flickering candlelight casting long shadows on the walls, they both understood the gravity of what lay ahead. The Ancient Ones were not just enemies. They were a force of darkness that threatened the entire galaxy. And the only way to stop them was to find the hidden artifact before they did. The path ahead would be perilous, filled with danger and uncertainty. But as long as they had each other, Jackson knew they stood a chance. The galaxy might be on the brink of destruction, but together they could still change its fate. And so, with a single determined look, they began their journey to uncover the secrets of the prophecy and to face the hidden threat that loomed over them all. The following days passed in a haze of preparation. The revelation that the Ancient Ones were watching them had shaken both Jackson and Zalara to their cores. They were no longer just two people caught in a forbidden love. They were the key to the survival of the galaxy. Their every move was now watched by those who had been waiting for this moment for centuries. Zalara had begun to grow more serious, her demeanor reflecting the weight of their mission. She had always been a figure of strength and grace, but now there was a hardness to her, a determination that came from knowing just how dangerous their path was. The Ancient Ones, she explained, were masters of manipulation and had agents hidden throughout the galaxy. If they found out that she and Jackson were trying to stop them, they would stop at nothing to ensure their failure. Jackson, for his part, had never felt more alive. The danger, the mystery, the weight of their situation, it all made his heart race with both fear and excitement. He had always been a man of reason, focused on diplomacy and negotiation. But now he was forced to think like a warrior. He couldn't back down, not when everything he had come to love, everything he had fought for, was at risk. The chamber where Zalara had revealed the prophecy became their meeting place. They spent hours there, poring over ancient texts, looking for any clue that could guide them toward the hidden artifact. Zalara had shared everything she knew about the artifact's location, but the details were few. It was said to be hidden beneath the palace, in a place where only the royal bloodline could go. That was the only certainty they had. Everything else was a mystery. "We need to act quickly," Zalara said one evening as she studied an ancient map of the palace. "The Ancient Ones have no doubt already sensed that we are getting closer to the artifact. We can't waste any more time." Jackson nodded, his gaze fixed on her. There was no doubt in his mind that they had to move fast. The longer they waited, the more likely the Ancient Ones would catch wind of their plans. "I'm ready," he said firmly. Zalara's eyes softened for a moment and she placed a hand on his arm. "I don't want you to get hurt, Jackson. You don't know what we're up against. These beings are ancient, far older than anything we've ever encountered. Their power is beyond comprehension." "I'm not afraid," Jackson replied, his voice steady. "I've seen what they're capable of, but I'm not going to let them destroy everything we've worked for. I'm with you, Zalara. No matter what." Zalara looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she nodded. "I believe you, Jackson, and I'm grateful. But I need to ask you something." "What?" Jackson asked, feeling a twinge of unease. If things go wrong," she began, her voice softer now. "If we fail, I need you to promise me something. Promise me that you'll leave Vothran, that you'll go back to Earth, to your people. This war, this conflict, it's not something you can fight alone. It's too dangerous." Jackson was silent for a moment, his heart sinking. He had always known that this mission was fraught with danger, but he hadn't considered the possibility that they might fail. The thought of leaving Zalara, of abandoning her in the face of such overwhelming odds, was almost too much to bear. "I'm not going anywhere," he said firmly. "I'm not leaving you." Zalara gave a small, sad smile. "I hope you mean that." "I do," Jackson said, stepping closer to her. "We're in this together." The intensity of the moment hung in the air between them, and for a brief instant, it felt like nothing else mattered. The fate of the galaxy, the prophecy, the Ancient Ones, none of it seemed to matter as much as the two of them standing there, knowing that they were in this fight together. "We'll find the artifact," Zalara said finally, her voice resolute. "We have to. It's our only hope." The decision was made. They would enter the deepest, most dangerous parts of the palace and find the artifact before the Ancient Ones did. There was no turning back now. Zalara knew that the risks were high, but she also knew that they had no other choice. If they didn't act, the galaxy would be doomed. That night, they gathered everything they would need for the journey. Zalara had prepared an ancient map that would lead them to the hidden chambers beneath the palace. She had also brought a few weapons, tools passed down through her royal family, weapons of both beauty and power. Jackson wasn't sure how useful they would be, but he didn't question it. If there was one thing he had learned in these past few days, It was that nothing was ever as simple as it seemed. They met in the palace's courtyard, where the cool night air seemed to hold its breath. Zalara, wearing a simple cloak to blend in with the shadows, led the way. Jackson followed closely behind, his mind racing with the possibilities of what lay ahead. The ancient chambers were a labyrinth, twisting and turning beneath the palace, and the deeper they went, the darker it became. The air grew colder, and the walls seemed to close in around them. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of walking through darkened hallways, they arrived at a small, unassuming door at the far end of a narrow corridor. Zalara hesitated for a moment, her hand resting on the door's handle. "This is it," she said, her voice low. "This is the entrance to the artifact's chamber. Once we go in, there's no turning back." Jackson nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. They had come this far. Now they had to push forward no matter the cost. Together, they pushed the door open and stepped into the darkness beyond. Inside, the room was vast, its ceiling high and lost in shadow. The air was thick with dust, and the only light came from the faint glow of bioluminescent plants growing along the walls. As they moved deeper into the chamber, Jackson could feel a strange energy in the air, a hum that seemed to vibrate through his very bones. At the center of the room, resting on a pedestal of ancient stone, was the artifact. It was unlike anything Jackson had ever seen. The object seemed to glow with an ethereal light, shifting colors as if it were alive. It was beautiful and terrifying all at once. "This is it," Zalara whispered. "This is what will determine the fate of the galaxy." Jackson reached out slowly, his hand trembling as he touched the artifact. As his fingers made contact with its surface, a surge of energy coursed through him, filling him with both fear and wonder. And then, everything went dark.